The 401 had been standing still since before the Mississauga exit. A jackknifed transport somewhere ahead had turned 40 kilometers of highway into a car park, and by the time I finally swung off the ramp and found the back road to the old mill venue, the cocktail hour was long over. The parking attendant had already gone home. I found a spot myself near the cedar hedge and sat there with the engine running, watching the warm light spill from the tall windows of the converted building. I checked my collar in the rearview mirror. I'd worn the gray suit I bought for my wife's funeral 8 years ago. I'd known that the moment I put it on that morning, but it was the best thing I owned. At 64, I'd stopped pretending otherwise. I'm a retired electrician from Guelph. I don't own a dinner jacket. The gift bag on the passenger seat held a handmade cutting board I'd spent 3 weekends on. Walnut and maple end grain with their initials routed into the corner and filled with a dark stain. It was the finest piece I'd ever made in my workshop. I'd turned down 2 commissions from a kitchen shop in town to have the time to finish it. I grabbed the bag and walked toward the sound of the string quartet drifting through the October evening. There was a side path that ran along the mill pond to a set of French doors at the back of the building. I took it, not wanting to walk in through the front entrance and draw attention to myself. The path was lit with small lanterns, and the dark water beside me caught the reflections of the lights inside. I heard my son's voice before I reached the doors. He was standing on the narrow stone patio with a small group. His wife, her brother, 2 women I didn't recognize, all of them holding champagne flutes and laughing at something. Then one of the women said it, loud enough to carry clearly across the water. He actually almost didn't make it. Can you imagine? All that, and then no father of the groom. My son laughed, a full, easy laugh. Honestly, half of me thought it might be simpler. His wife touched his arm. "Don't," she said, still smiling. "He's your dad." She said it the way you'd say it's fine about a stain on a tablecloth. "I just mean, you know how he can be," my son added, more laughter from the group. I stopped walking. The lantern nearest me flickered once. I looked down at the gift bag in my hand and thought about the 3 weekends I'd spent in the workshop. And the time before that, when I'd driven an hour and a half to a specialty lumber yard outside Hamilton, because I wanted the maple to have the right figure in the grain. I stood there until the group moved back inside. Then I walked to a bench near the water's edge and sat down in the dark. The mill had been converted beautifully, I'll give them that. Inside, the old timber beams were strung with Edison bulbs, and the tables were set with linen and tall candle arrangements. My son and his wife had talked about this venue for a long time. I'd heard about it in passing, mostly through his brief check-in calls. The kind that last 8 minutes and cover the weather, hockey standings, and nothing else. I found my name on the seating chart near the entrance, table 11. I didn't know where that was until I spent a minute studying the diagram on the easel. It was in the far corner, beside the bar service station, facing the wall. I walked there slowly. At table 11, I introduced myself to the couple already seated, a pair of my daughter-in-law's relatives from out west, pleasant enough, but strangers. They smiled politely and returned to their own conversation. I put the gift bag under my chair and unfolded my napkin. The first course came. A server walked past my table without stopping. I raised my hand slightly, the way I used to flag down the parts counter at the supply house. He circled back, apologized, and handed me a plate with the same careful look people give you when they realize they've overlooked something. The toasts began before the main course. My daughter-in-law's father went first, a long, gracious speech about his daughter's remarkable journey and how my son had become the son he always hoped for. He was a good speaker. I clapped with everyone else. Her mother cried. Her brother made a joke that got a big laugh. Then my son stood up. I watched him from across the room. At 31, he looked more like his mother every year. Her dark eyes, her way of standing with one hand in his jacket pocket when he was nervous. I used to watch him do that before hockey games when he was 12. He thanked everyone who had shaped who he was. He talked about his wife's family. He talked about his childhood friends, 3 of whom were at table 6 and cheered when he mentioned them. He talked about his old coach from a travel team I'd driven him to practice for. 4 mornings a week for 3 years. He didn't look toward table 11 once. He sat down to applause. His wife kissed his cheek. The string quartet began to play again. I kept both hands on my thighs under the table and watched the room. The gift bag was still under my chair. The video they played between courses was supposed to be a love story. How the 2 of them had grown up and found each other. My son had sent a text 3 months earlier. "Hey, got a sec to send some old pics for the slideshow?" I'd spent an afternoon going through boxes in the spare room, scanning the best ones on the printer I'd bought, specifically for that purpose. The ones I sent, my son holding his first fish at age 7, standing in the bow of my old aluminum boat at the cottage. My son and me, after his first time on the roof of a house, we were helping a neighbor reshingle. He was 16, proud as anything. My son the day he passed his licensing exam, shaking my hand in front of the office building, both of us squinting into the September sun. I watched the screen. I saw his school photos, his prom, his university convocation, a camping trip with friends, a ski hill I didn't recognize. In the fishing photo, I was gone. The image had been cropped to show only him, the rod, and the water. In the reshingle photo, only the edge of the roofline remained where I'd been standing beside him. They'd pulled the frame so tight, it showed just his face and sky. The hand shaking my hand outside the licensing office was simply absent. His arm floated slightly raised, reaching toward nothing. I watched every slide. Then I looked down at my bread plate and picked up my water glass and took a sip. The room applauded. I set my glass down. I left during the cake cutting. Not dramatically. I stood up, collected the gift bag from under my chair, and walked out through the side door near the kitchen. A server loading a tray glanced up and nodded. I nodded back. My car was cold. The October night had dropped fast. I sat in the parking lot until most of the other cars were still there. Engines off, radio quiet, watching the lit windows and the silhouettes of people moving inside. Then I drove home. It's 2 hours back to Guelph on a clear night. I took the back roads. The gift bag sat on the kitchen table until the following morning. I made instant coffee. The real stuff was in the cupboard, but I didn't feel like grinding beans, and stood looking at the bag until I put it in the hall closet, behind my tool bags, where I wouldn't have to look at it. My neighbor Harvey knocked at about 10. He's 71, retired firefighter, lives alone since his daughter moved to Calgary. He doesn't so much knock as knock and open, which I've stopped minding over the 12 years we've lived beside each other. "Fridge is full," he said, holding up a casserole dish. His sister had visited and cooked in bulk, same as always. He set it on the counter and looked at me. "How was it?" "Fine," I said. Harvey sat down at the kitchen table without being asked. He's good at waiting. "They didn't save me a proper seat," I said, eventually. "My son gave a speech. Didn't mention me. The photos I sent for the slideshow, they cut me out of every one of them." Harvey was quiet for a long moment. "All of them?" "All of them." He ran his thumb along a groove in the table, a mark I'd made years ago moving a router too fast. "What are you going to do about it?" I shook my head. I didn't have an answer yet. My son called 4 days later. He sounded breezy, the way he always does when he's been thinking about how to sound, a rhythm that doesn't quite fit him. "Hey, Dad. Just wanted to make sure you got home all right. The 401 must have been brutal." "I managed," I said. "Listen, we're thinking about doing a little family thing at Christmas. Nothing big. Just wanted to give you a heads up." A pause. "And hey, I don't know if you've thought about this at all, but now that it's just you in that house, it's a big place for one person, right?" My wife was mentioning that with the market the way it is, I've thought about it, I said. I'm not interested in selling. A pause. Dad, no one's pressuring you. She just... I know, I said. I'll let you know if that changes. We said goodbye, and I set the phone on the counter. I stood there in my kitchen. The kitchen I'd rewired myself in 2009, where I'd taught my son to make pancakes on Saturday mornings when he was 9, where his mother and I had sat up until 2 in the morning, the night she got her diagnosis, drinking tea and not saying much, and I thought about the word just. Just you in that house, as if the house had been full of someone, and now it wasn't. And the logical next step was to empty it the rest of the way. That night, I went back and read 2 texts my son had sent in September. Ones I hadn't paid much attention to at the time. Hey, is the lot zoned residential only or mixed? Then, 2 weeks later, random Q. Do you know if there are any infill restrictions in your area? I had answered both questions. I hadn't wondered why he was asking. The community center on Speedvale ran a woodworking class on Thursday evenings. I'd walked past the sign for 3 years. In early November, I walked in and signed up. There were 6 of us in the first session. A retired teacher, a young woman who wanted to build furniture for her apartment, a man about my age who'd been an accountant and kept apologizing for not knowing anything, 2 others who barely spoke. The instructor, a woman in her 50s who'd been a Finnish carpenter for 20 years, looked at my hands when I introduced myself and said, "You've done this before." "Decades," I said. "Then you're not here to learn," she said. "You're here for the company." I didn't argue. She was right. There's something about working with your hands in a room with other people that makes conversation easier. You're both looking at the wood. Nobody has to maintain eye contact. I found myself talking more in that class than I had in months. I mentioned once that I had a grown son. The retired teacher nodded. "Mine's in Vancouver," she said. "We talk at Christmas." She said it without bitterness. Just as a fact, the way you'd say the drive is 3 hours. I started showing up early and staying late. The instructor let me use the equipment room on my own after the first few weeks. I showed the young woman how to properly flatten a board with a hand plane. She showed me how to photograph finished pieces with decent light so the grain came through, because she said my cutting boards deserved better pictures than what I'd been passed, talking to the small online shop I'd started in October. I put 4 boards up. By December, I had 11 orders. My son called again in early December with the news about the baby. He sounded genuinely happy, happier than I'd heard him in a long while, and something in me came slightly undone at the sound of it, in a good way. I congratulated him and meant every word. Then, with the baby coming, we're going to need more space than the condo. We've been looking at older homes in your neighborhood, actually, and we thought, maybe this is the time to have a real conversation about the property, about the future. I said I wasn't selling. He started to say they weren't asking me to sell. "I know what you're working around," I said, not sharply, just honestly. "I'm happy about the baby. I'll be a good grandfather if I'm allowed to. But my house stays mine, and I'd like to stop having that be the undercurrent of every conversation we have." Silence. "Okay," he said finally. "Merry Christmas," I said. "Merry Christmas, Dad." I met with a lawyer that December and had the property transferred into a trust. Named a local land conservancy as the secondary beneficiary. It was the responsible thing to do regardless. I should have done it years ago, but I won't pretend the timing was a coincidence. Harvey was on my porch the Saturday before Christmas with 2 Tim Hortons cups and a look on his face that meant he'd been sitting with something. We watched a cardinal on the feeder for a while. My wife had put that feeder up. I'd refilled it every winter since she died. "You seem steadier," Harvey said. "I'm busy," I told him. "Sometimes that's enough to start with." I told him about the trust. He was quiet, then laughed, a short, real sound. "Good," he said. Should have done it years ago, I said. Yes, he agreed, but you did it now. We drank our coffee. The Cardinal held its spot on the feeder for a long time, unimpressed by either of us. My son showed up in February without warning, pulling into the driveway on a Saturday afternoon while I was in the workshop. I heard the car and came out wiping sawdust off my hands. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps. The easy tone was gone. He looked the way I imagine people look when they've been carrying something they finally put down and their arms are still surprised by the lightness. I found the trust documents, he said. A copy came to my old address. I figured. A long pause. The neighbor's dog barked twice down the street. Is this because of the wedding? He asked. It's because of the wedding and the zoning texts and the conversation in November about how big the house is for one person, I said. But also because it's the responsible thing to do, and I should have done it a long time ago. He came up the steps and stood there. I heard you, he said quietly, on the path by the water, at the wedding. I saw you stop walking. He looked out at the street. I told myself you hadn't heard. I told myself you'd come inside and everything would be fine. I've been telling myself a lot of things. The workshop behind me smelled of walnut and linseed oil. Inside, there was a board half finished for a couple in the city who wanted something for their anniversary dinner. What did your wife say? I asked. He let out a breath. She said I've been using her as an excuse, that a lot of what I blamed on her, the plans, the assumptions about your house, I actually agreed with. He looked at me. She's not wrong. I nodded. I don't know how to fix this, he said. I don't even fully know how we got here. But I know I stood there that night and laughed, and I didn't say a word for you, and I let you sit at table 11 by the service station while her family got the front tables. And you came anyway. You brought something. You didn't make a scene. You just... He stopped. I went home, I said. Yeah. We stood in the cold February air. Come inside, I said. I'll put the kettle on. He followed me in. The baby arrived in June, a boy. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. My son called from the hospital just after 2 in the morning, his voice the good kind of wrecked. He's here, Dad. How's your wife? Tired, happy, she's asleep. And you? A pause. Scared, he admitted, really scared. That's right, I said. That's how it's supposed to feel. I drove to the hospital the next morning with a small gift, a hand-carved rattle I'd made in the workshop. Smooth maple, sized right, turned on the lathe until the weight felt correct, finished with food-safe oil. 2 evenings of work. Not because anyone would know the difference, but because he would use it, and things meant to be used deserve to be made properly. My daughter-in-law was sitting up in the bed when I came in, the baby in her arms. She looked at me when I entered and said, "Thank you for coming." Not hi or hello, thank you for coming, as if she understood what those 4 words meant in context. I sat in the chair beside the bed, and she passed him to me without my asking. He weighed almost nothing and everything at once. I held the back of his head the way I'd held my son's 31 years ago in a different hospital. Same wonder, same fear. He's got your chin, my daughter-in-law said. I looked up at her, surprised. She shrugged, slightly self-conscious. I'd been looking at old photos. My husband showed me. A pause. He showed me a lot of things. I looked back down at the baby. June light was coming in strong through the window. What's his name? I asked. My son said the name they'd chosen. Then, quietly, he said the middle name, my father's name. A name I hadn't heard attached to anything in 20 years. You didn't have to do that, I said. I know, my son said. That's why we did. The workshop sign used to be just a wood-burned plank with the street number nailed above the side door. In August, I replaced it. I cut a new piece from a scrap of white oak, left over from a custom order. Tight-grained, beautiful stuff. Routed the letters myself. Rubbed in a dark finish. and mounted it on 2 iron brackets from the hardware store. It reads, R. Devlin, Custom Woodwork. My name, just that. Harvey saw it from across the fence the morning I put it up. He walked over, squinted at it for a moment, and nodded once. About time, he said. The old one was fine, I told him. The old one had nothing on it, he said, and went back inside. I stood there in the morning sun, sawdust on my shirt, coffee going cold on the workbench behind me. The orders are steady now. The Thursday class is mine to lead. The instructor moved to a college position and handed me her time slot without ceremony. You're ready, she said. You've been ready. I show up early, stay late, and once in a while a student figures something out in front of me. The right way to read the grain, or how to feel when a joint is square by how it sits in your hand. And I remember why I do this. My son brings the baby over on Sunday afternoons, most weeks. We're taking it carefully, all of us, the way you'd carry something you've dropped once and don't want to drop again. The relationship isn't what it was before the wedding, but I'm not sure it should be. Before the wedding, I was at the edges of his life and convincing myself otherwise. Now I know where I stand, and so does he. Last Sunday, he sat in the workshop doorway while the baby slept in the carrier on his chest, watching me fit a drawer. He didn't say much, neither did I. After a while, he asked if I'd teach his son woodworking someday when he was old enough. If he wants to learn, I said. He will, my son said. I'll make sure of it. I kept working. The drawer fit true on the first try, the way good work sometimes does when you've taken your time and gotten everything right beforehand. Outside, the August light came long and flat across the driveway, and the sign above the door held my name steady in the quiet afternoon, asking nothing of anyone, needing no one's permission to be there.